Okay. So, as a reminder, I've gone ahead and, I made an announcement scheduling, basically a makeup session for last week. Um, I kind of waited to to cancel, and it was good that I did. I would have been pretty useless to you, but basically, if you want to meet on Tuesday at our regular meeting time, I will be here in the room, and we can go over anything you want to go over. Um, I will also be in office hour basically from the hour before our class meeting. So, and Cameron, maybe you and I can take a quick look at which link you used, and I'll look at which link I used, and they should have been the same link, but if they were off, I want to make sure that, you don't try to go into an office hour and I'm not there because I'm in another room. But so as you guys know, the ordinary schedule for finals week is that, there are obviously aren't classes and there aren't office hours, but I want to do that makeup. In addition, I'm around. So, oh, thanks for that, Cameron. Okay, I'll check it out. Um, in addition, I will be around. So if you have questions, problems, confusions, let me know. We'll schedule a time to chat so that we can just, chat one on one, and make sure that you've got what you need. Um, I also I owe you an exam three retest. Exam four is up, and I owe you an exam four retest. Remember, if the original exam doesn't go well, or even if it does, it can't hurt you to retest it because I take your best score. Please know also that the the quizzes are I think anyway, harder than the exams. What I try to do in the exams is focus our attention on a specific set of skills that I think are important for us to have as we finish, or as we work on this course and then finish up the course. Okay. So there's some naughty stuff, that not naughty as in Naughty, but naughty as in Knotty, naughty stuff that Dr. Snee gets into in this last bit of material, and so if that's a little bit of a struggle, it's understandable. But I hope that by the time we're done tonight, you'll know exactly what you need to focus on, and we'll have resolved questions, problems, and confusions. So before we launch into things, do you have a question, a particular question, problem, or confusion that you want to get to?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I think I know this, but I just want to confirm it. On the Aristotelian forms, when you say, for example, um, the universal affirmative, and then when you say the existential affirmative or negative, on the universal affirmative or negative, you use the dash symbol. For example, all dogs are sleeping. You use the conditional symbol.
Right.
But when it comes to existential, you say, for example, some dogs are not sleeping. You use the and connective. I think I know, but I just want to confirm to see why that difference is there.
Okay. So two things. One is, I'll give you a verbal, and then the other is, it might take me a second because, as you know, I'm still learning my way around this textbook. But I also want to give you the section of the specific chapter, or sorry, the specific section of the chapter in which Dr. Schnee is talking about these concepts. So because they're very often, he very deftly, very I think concisely articulates a concept. And I don't believe I can do better. What I can do is provide an alternative that may resonate. So when we have a universal, let's take a universal affirmative, and let's take an existential affirmative, just to keep things as uncomplicated as possible in terms of notation. Let's say that the universal affirmative involves the two terms. We've got two predicates, right? So let's say all dogs are animals. What we're saying is that there are things in the universe, right? And every single thing that's a dog is an animal. Now here's where the arrow part comes into play. When we say all are, and we've got in ordinary English, are, A-R-E, is the conjugation of the verb to be. And in this case, are denotes a predicate relationship, a property, if you will. We need a way to articulate what are is. So let's think about, so here's one way to think about it. We've got 5 choices. We've got negation. Well, that won't work because negation doesn't go in between 2 sentences, right? Negation always goes to the left of whatever is being rejected. But we've got 2 sentences, right? We've got the dog things and the animal things. So that means that we've either got a conjunction, a disjunction, a conditional, or a biconditional. Now, if we throw the conjunction in, the following sentence results. Everything is a dog and an animal. No, that doesn't sound like it matches, if you will. All dogs are animals, right? Everything is a dog or an animal. No, that doesn't seem right either, right? The ordinary English, all dogs are animals, doesn't express the one or the other. Now let's try, if it's a dog, it's an animal, or if dog, then animal. Notice, so hold on to that. Notice that when we've got the larger, in this case, the larger category, the larger class, animals, whatever's a dog gets dumped into it. That's what the all SRP or all PRQ, however you want to articulate the form, that's what that sentence expresses, right? It's a relationship between things that are, in this case, dogs, things that are animals. How many things? Every single one of these things, right? But we know that there are, so I'm fudging on our intuitions. This is not the best logical explanation, but let me try it. Rephrase. There are things that are animals that aren't dogs, right? But what we can say is if we do have a dog, then we most definitely have an animal. We're not saying that we do have a dog, but whatever things are dogs, if we've got the dog, then we've got the animal. And notice now, as we're just talking about it in ordinary English, we start slipping into the if-then form.
No, I get it. I get it now. I think I was confusing the and symbol, which you just explained, that if you use the and symbol for that, that means everything is a dog and an animal.
Right, which we don't want to say.
If for everything that's a dog is an animal. If it's a dog, it's an animal.
Yeah, really good. And then, for the existential, we're saying, so the ordinary English sum is arguably more accurately, or sorry, the concept that the word sum represents or denotes is maybe more accurately articulated by the phrase, there is at least one. Right? So we say, okay, so some dogs are pit bulls. There is at least one dog, and it's a pit bull.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the things that I like about this particular work, I've mentioned this to you before, but is it in my case anyway, it forces me to to think about what exactly it is that I'm trying to sort of conceptually carve out when I'm in this when I'm in this realm of quantifier logic. But it's also some of this, but it also can be kind of tricky. What else do you have that you want to clarify?
So for exam 4, I'll turn my camera on since everybody else.
Yay, hi Julianne.
For exam 4, it goes up to chapter 33 or to 35.
33. Yeah,
33.
yeah. We don't get into sort of in a standard. It's sad. In a sort of a standard intro logic course, we don't typically get into this other material. So, and just as a reminder, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll double check, there are a few exercises in the relevant quizzes that are pretty tricky. They require a lot of thought, and especially when we're dealing with translations, multiple quantifiers that are required for given translations. Things can get difficult and can get confusing. And it's so not only is it great that Abdul has reminded us that our foundational translations are going to be those 4 Aristotelian forms, because when things do get rough, we can go back to those. But also on exam 4, what I'm asking you to focus on does not. I'll double check. But should not involve multiply quantified sentences. Not that we can't work those and that we don't think that they're worthwhile, but I'd rather us spend our time making sure that we're really comfortable with how we can construct and complete a proof using our quantifier rules. And then, backfilling a bit, making sure that we're comfortable with some of the basics of translations, as well as equivalences. So recall that we talked about quantifier equivalences. The language that our text uses is, I think it's De Morgan's for quantifiers. Sorry, bear with me. I'm just going to open up sections so I can see. Yeah. And we'll go over some of this together. Yeah, right. So let me share my screen with you. Right. So, for example, in the quiz, and I want to say also on the exam, but I'll double check. We want to be comfortable with, if certainly our De Morgan's for quantifiers. Ideally also will be proficient with distributing quantifiers. One of the items that we haven't really talked about is the pre-next form versus nested, although I think I had mentioned that a little bit ago. but really so here's where we can get into stuff that's a little bit, that can be a bit tricky, right? So if you have trouble with some translating, don't worry, you're not alone. That's normal. One of the, what you won't see on the exam is the numerical quantification material, but I really like how he treats it. He just does this really lovely job with helping us understand how we can carve out a domain of discourse more exactingly than a standard universal quantifier, existential quantifier kind of allows us to do. Okay, but what I'd like to do, and I don't want to commandeer our time. I want to make in terms of in terms of like ignoring what you want to cover, but I want to make sure we go over our rules and we do some practice with those. I know I owe you some additional practice. I'll make sure that happens. But one of the but that's where where a fair amount of our exam is on which a fair amount of our exam is focused. Okay.
I have a question on this topic. I asked it a couple weeks ago, but I never figured out the answer. On quiz 8, there's where it's talking about the equivalency principles of quantifiers. There's one on the test that says BDC.
Yeah. Cameron, yeah. I know. Thank you.
How am I supposed to know that?
I know. You know what? I don't know if the kids still say my bad. I was just going over that very issue yesterday or the day before. So, okay. So let's look at this. One of the questions that I had when I went and reviewed the quiz myself was, did I miss something in the textbook? You know, and I was going through each of the sections looking to see if I had missed this discussion. And I'll tell you, unless I have missed it. So Abdul and Julianne, if you've found it, let me know. But let's see. So what Cameron's talking about is material from chapter 25, right? Equivalences. And what and I'll show you the extra practice in just a moment so you can see what Cameron's talking about, and then you can tie it back to the quiz. But you know what Dr. Schnee does is he says, okay, I'm going to give you these names, sort of little shorthand for types of equivalence, right? So, for example, we've got De Morgan's for quantifiers. We've talked about them. I talked about them in terms of, and I'm going to click on it now. I talked about those equivalences in terms of change of quantifier or quantifier exchange or quantifier equivalence, right? But this is the language that he's using, De Morgan's for quantifiers, right? And then we're not going to worry about null quantification. And we've got some distribution.
I have all the original ones, and then I have EDC, which is not clear what that is. I have null, variable switch, distribution,
and QR,
normal form,
right?
Quantifier reorder.
Okay, so Cameron, this is what I think I've learned, because I was looking, and I apologize that I didn't flag this in advance. So here's the BDC, right? It's what it should stand for. Now hold on just a sec, because I think I have to go into the. I may have just lost my mind altogether. In other words, if I have the concept right, I shouldn't have to look too hard for this. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so yeah, under distribution of quantifier. Okay, all right. So here, and I will write a note to Dr. Schnee to confirm that this is what he has in mind. But BDC should have to do with taking a conditional and swapping it out for a disjunction, and then putting a negation on the left side of the disjunction. I'll write this out for you in just a sec. The idea is that if you look here, P arrow Q is equivalent to negation P or Q, right? So when you're working on trying to distribute quantifiers, if you've got a conditional, the first thing you want to do is swap out, if you will, the conditional for the disjunction, and then add the negation on the left side of the disjunction. But what I didn't find as I was searching through these sections was the explicit reference to this process. And so these two sentences are truth functionally equivalent to each other. If you want to give it a name, it's oftentimes called implicating or implication. So what you do is you implicate by swapping out as I mentioned, the conditional for the disjunction. But I didn't find this named as such in the text. So what I'll do for the quiz is I'll just, work the score accordingly. And then what I did on the exam is when I came across that same thing, I took that particular exercise out, not because you can't do it, but because that BDC shorthand just doesn't, to the best of my knowledge, appear in the text elsewhere. I think it might have just been an oversight when he was writing.
So it's a different rule that doesn't have the acronym BDC, and we're also not sure what it is at all.
Well, we know what it is. We're not given, to the best of my knowledge, the shorthand, the initialism BDC, right? But if we go back to, should be the case, hold on just a sec, where this originates is, it should originate in the material on the conditionals. All right, so hold on just a sec. Let me show you. Okay, so when let's go back to our truth functional work. We know that the conditional is, I did not just do that. I was going to say the word false and I wrote it and I wrote the F instead. We know that the conditional is false in one case only, right? And that's when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, right? In all other cases, it's true. We also know that the negation is always the opposite. The values of negation are always the opposite of the sentence that's negated. So we end up with the following. So these two sentences are truth functionally equivalent. So now when you step back into the discussion of distributing quantifiers, and you've got a quantified sentence that's got an arrow as its operator in terms of the truth functional operators, then the idea is that you would move from the conditional to the disjunction with the negation on the left side, and then distribute from there. So like I said, I mean, I'll ask him. I mean, he's really, really thorough. So my suspicion is, so my first thought was, oh, I missed something here. You know, it's got to be in the text somewhere. And then when I didn't find it in the text, I thought, okay, well, I'd better take this exercise out of the exam. But it was already in the quiz, and it was too late there. But the others, you said you did find no problem, yes?
Well, yeah, they're all listed as
Okay.
sections of that chapter.
Okay, good.
So, I mean,
yeah, I mean, I know it sounds like a no-brainer question, but I want to ask it anyway, just because I know that sometimes when there's a lot of concepts flying around, you might start to feel a little bit, overloaded. So, yeah, and then don't forget.
no, I mean, they're all written out on a list here, except the one that doesn't,
Yeah.
that isn't in the book.
Yeah, and
I couldn't find it in this either. I got the bar-wise and etching.
Oh, it's not. It won't. It's not in there.
Yeah, it's not in here.
Yeah. But I will send him a note, and you'll help future generations. I'm glad you've got the Barwise and Etchemende book, because you've got a way to sort of cross list, if you like, the articulations of the material.
I guess I'm having so much trouble since day one with this online textbook for whatever reason.
Trouble as in just the comprehension part of it?
Yeah.
Okay. But we've talked about this, Cameron, that this is not abnormal, right? It's not at all abnormal. For some reason, for some of us, and by some I mean most of us, the stuff just it doesn't seem to click, but when it does click, it just cracks wide open. So let's make sure that we know what we definitely want to be good at, right? So that when you're confronted with an exercise on the exam, you know what you're being asked to do and how to do it, even if it might be slow going. So let's do this. We'd spent a couple of weeks on a bunch of the basics. Not that we can't go back to them, but let's do this. I'd like us to get into chapter 30, which brings us to what I'm going to call the mirror rules for what we learned in Boole and in propositional logic. Right? So does everybody remember that when we are going to prove the conclusion of a valid argument, or if we have a necessarily true sentence, we can prove that sentence without any premises at all. But the way that we do it, the process that we use, involves pairs of rules, and the pairs of rules are one pair for each of our operators, right? So one of the things I'm going to give you, which is going to mirror your rule sheet from the chapters where we were dealing with negation intro, negation elim, conjunction intro, conjunction elim, biconditional intro, biconditional elim, right? Remember that rule sheet? You'll have another one, and this time you'll have pairs of rules for your universal quantifier, a pair of rules each for your universal quantifier, your existential quantifier, and your identity predicate. Okay? So the identity predicate is the only predicate that is a logical symbol, and has a fixed meaning. And although it, like the quantifiers, is not truth functional, in other words, you can't run a sentence that is constituted by an identity symbol through a truth table and get a reasonable what you would expect to be a set of truth values that are intuitive, right? You know, those sentences are also going to be true or false. Okay. All right. So, where's my? Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. So, let me just find. Okay. So this is chapter 30 and chapter 31. Okay, so quantifier and identity rules. Okay, so let's start with the rules that are the most intuitive to us, what our text calls the easy rules, right? We've got the universal elimination rule, where when you're in a proof, you will peel off or eliminate a universal quantifier and instantiate each of the variables that the quantifier binds. So here's the rule form. So if you have some sentence universal P, it follows that you have, let's say, A is P. Right? So let's try an ordinary English version. If everything is perfect, it follows that, it follows that Albert is perfect. All right, so bear in mind as we're moving into proofs for quantifiers that we are still involved in a process of assembling and dismantling, right? So just like we did with our truth functional operators, we are going to either introduce or eliminate a quantifier. Okay? So remember the domain of discourse. If everything in the domain specified is P, then I can name any individual, and that individual is also P. Okay? Similarly, so let's now go the other direction, but we are going to restrict how far we go in the other direction. So for example, so we have the existential intro rule. If some individually named entity, in this case A, has property P, it follows that something is P, or there is some P, right? So if Albert is perfect, it follows that someone is perfect. Now we'll talk about why you can't just, so look at universal elim, why you can't just peel off an existential quantifier the way you peel off the universal. We'll also talk about why you can't just move from the, or generalize to the universal from a name, right? So we'll talk about this, I hope, in terms that make sense to you, so that you've got something that, you know, to rely on, even if the formal accounts don't really resonate. Okay, so remember what we're doing. We've got an argument, and we need to manipulate the elements of this argument in order to demonstrate, to provide an account of how the premise or premises yield the conclusion. Okay, so you can move then from the universal elimination to an existential claim, right? But you won't be able to move from a universal to the name, the instance, or the instantiation of the universal, and then to another universal. Okay, and again, we'll talk a bit about why. Okay, so question for you: does this ring bells in terms of just the idea of eliminating or introducing an item? I'm gonna think yes, but don't be shy if that's not the case.
I just want to see the rule sheet, but I don't think it's available to us.
No, you know what I need to do is adjust it for us. So when I fell behind, among the things that I hadn't got caught up on yet is the rule sheet. But let me show you at least the version that is ready to go.
Yes.
Right, so when you're working through a proof, as you already know, the process involves citing your source, right? So where did you get the line that you've just derived? So you may have one source, you may have two sources, you may have a subproof sequence, right? So you cite your source, and then you assert the justification, right? So this is where I got the line I just derived, and here's the rule that justifies the move, right? So one of the things that's really great about these derivation, about working in these derivation sequences is you get just very used to citing and justifying, and that kind of bleeds into, at least I find, bleeds into other areas, you know, of my life. I'm not going to make a claim that especially if it's a claim I want someone to believe, that I can't source and justify. Okay. So can you see this okay, Cameron, the quantifier and identity rules?
Yeah.
So
my point was just that, like, what is required to be justified in the proof is not intuitive. It's specific to every rule. So just saying that it somehow is intuitive is just, like, wrong. Like, for example, like for the arrow intro, you have to cite the entire subproof. But
right.
Then for like arrow elim, you have to cite just 2 lines. It just, I don't know. It's not intuitive for me.
So what I think is typically intuitive for us is what we were just talking about, namely that the removal of a universal quantifier, right, leaves us with basically just a statement function, but we replace the variable with a name, right? So, if everyone in our room is tired right now, right? It doesn't matter who I name. If everyone is tired, Cameron's tired. If everyone is tired, Abdul's tired. If everyone is tired, Julianne is tired. In other words, it doesn't take a lot of brain power, right? To see how this universal elim works. Is that fair enough to say? In addition, I think it doesn't take a lot of work to see that when we start with an individual, right, so a named entity, that we can generalize in a limited way. We can generalize to the existential, right? So think about it this way. I mean, okay, so I'm looking at Abdul right now. It's true that Abdul has a beard. Does it follow from Abdul having a beard that everyone has a beard? No, you'd say, Mia, no, that's false, right? On the other hand, it's perfectly reasonable, intuitive, if you will, to say that if it's true that Abdul has a beard, then someone does, right? Similarly, if we say, Mia wears glasses, that we would be hard pressed to think it's justifiable to infer from one person wearing glasses that everyone does. On the other hand, the limited generalization from one person wearing glasses to someone wearing glasses, existential intro, that's fairly intuitive, right? So we don't have to work too hard at those. What you were talking about, and we're going to get to these guys next, the harder rules. What you were talking about makes sense. It doesn't feel intuitive that this is what you do, right? I think a lot of the process. I just realized, by the way, that when I went to end the share of the whiteboard, I didn't save the previous whiteboard, so sorry. But I'll rewrite the thing. Anyway, there is quite a bit of work that we do that, feels very discombobulating. It takes a while to assimilate it. Okay. And there's a lot of drilling exercises. Okay. So chapters, what was it? 30 and 31? Quantifier and identity rules. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just rewrite the first couple, but I'm going to change out the order because I want to make room for other rules. So the universal elim involves instantiating, right? Providing an instance of. If everything is P, it follows that A is P. Okay. And then the existential intro says if A is P, there is a P. Okay. And then I'm going to limit, I'm going to go ahead and write the identity intro rule, but but we so rarely use it that, it's in a sense it's pointless writing it out, but because all of our rules come in pairs, right? We've got the symmetry of these pairs. We'll just go ahead and write it in. But let's start with the elim. So identity elim, you've already worked it before, right? So if we have some sentence, n is identical to, or actually let's just do it this way. If P is identical to Q and Q is identical to R, it follows that P is identical to R. Right? Another way we can articulate this rule is as follows. If we have, some sentence P, and then we also know that N is identical to M, it follows that M is P as well. And identity elim, tends to be a pretty straightforward rule, right? We tend to get it without too much work. The trickier rules then are, and this goes back to partly now we'll pick up with a point that Cameron had made earlier, are our subproof rules. So notice, by the way, that universal elim and existential intro do not require subproofs, right? They're tactical rules, if you will. The introduction of a universal, and there are two versions, does require a subproof. So let me start with the more straightforward of the two versions, and then we'll see what you think. So when you have a universal that covers a conditional, this is what you do. Sorry, that's ugly. This is what you do. You assume that you have the antecedent with an arbitrary name. From that assumption, you derive the consequent of that same arbitrarily named entity, so that you can say, look, I assumed that there's this arbitrarily named individual that's P, and from this assumption, I've proven that N is also Q. Therefore, and again, this is crucial, since N is an arbitrary name, any P I could find is Q. Okay. Let me give you the other version of the rule, and then let's try to make some more sense of it. And by the way, please remember, we're folding into the work we're doing now our previous proof work. So it's not like you don't have to, so it's not like you have to learn that. You've already got that under your belt. Okay. So the other version is this. When your conclusion is a universal, but it's not a universal that covers a conditional, can cover other connectives, but not a conditional. And I'm just going to use the atomic sentence here. You assume an arbitrary name. So Dr. Schnee uses the @ symbol for arbitrary name. And from the assumption that there's this arbitrarily named thing in the world, you prove that that arbitrarily named thing is P. It follows that everything is. Now, if you say, okay, Mia, I heard the words, it's in English, but what you just said just doesn't make any sense at all. Well, think about, let's borrow maybe from some ideas with which you're already familiar. suppose that you want to find out why so many millions of people voted for Donald Trump in the presidential election that just ended. And you want to know why so many millions of people voted for Joe Biden, right? So, we've got these two distinct groups, right? You've got all the Trump people and all the Biden people, right? Now, you don't know if you're a pollster or you're a social scientist and you don't know kind of who's who, right? But suppose that you want to prove something about everybody who voted. You don't know who is who. So maybe part of what you do, and this is what social scientists are sort of required to do, it's part of their methodology, they get random representative samples. Does that sound familiar? Does this sound right to you? And if you say, me, I don't care about polling. I don't know about any of this. I have no idea. Let me know, because there's no point in going on. I'll try a different way of approaching it. What do you think?
That's fine.
Okay. All right, good. We got one. All right. So the pollster is going to effectively grab a person, right? Person walking down the street. Let's say, let's pretend there's no COVID. Let's pretend we're all cheek to jowl on the streets of Los Angeles, right? Hey, you. I don't know who you are. You're just some guy. Come here. Can you come here a sec? Randomly chosen. Arbitrarily chosen. Here's the key feature about this arbitrarily assumed name, right? It's kind of like a constant. It's kind of like a variable. If I can prove from just this name that I've grabbed out of a hat, that this name that I've grabbed out of a hat is thus and such, right? Is a Trump supporter, is a Biden, so whatever it is that I'm aiming to prove. If I can, by grabbing that name, prove this thing, because the name was arbitrarily chosen, randomly plucked, that means that I can generalize and say, well, anybody then that I could grab. If I can say it about this randomly chosen dude, then I can say it about anybody. Now, remember, the vast majority of our universal claims are within, a fairly well-defined domain of discourse. And what I mean by that is, we're not typically talking about everything in the universe. We are typically talking about everything within an increasingly specified or carved out set of areas of things, right? So all dogs and cats are animals, right? Not every Republican is willing to say that Joe Biden is president-elect, right? Even with the existential, right? We're saying there is at least one, but we're talking about, the domain of Republicans, people who will acknowledge that Joe Biden is president-elect, right? All dogs and cats are animals. We're talking about the domain restricted to dogs, cats, animals, or the domains, I should say. Right? So when we've got this universal at the end of our argument, it's a universal that is talking about, you know, things that are at least somewhat specified, right, by their predicates or by their class belonging, if you will. And so when we reach into the barrel to grab a name, or we are reaching into a barrel to grab a relevant name, if you will, right? That goes back to the point I made about the, you know, the randomized but representative sample. Right? So that's what that arbitrary name does. If you go back to The Simpsons, the episode with the French bowler, remember the French bowler was trying to seduce Marge? And the French bowler says, Marge, let me take you to brunch. And Marge says, brunch? What's brunch? And he says, it's not quite breakfast and it's not quite cantaloupe, or it's not quite breakfast and it's not quite lunch, but it comes with a cantaloupe at the end. The arbitrary name is like the brunch of logic. It's not quite an individual constant. It is a name, but it's not the name of somebody we know necessarily. So it is a name, but because it's not, you know, A for this Abdul that we know, right? It's a randomly chosen name. It's kind of close to a variable as well. And because it's kind of close to a variable, it allows us, if you will, to get back to the universal at the end of our proof. As we work through some examples, I think it'll get better. Okay? Questions so far though about this set of rules? Oops. Okay, so then we have come on, Mia. Existential elimination. Now remember, there's no restriction on the universal elimination, right? That's because the universal is exhaustive of the domain of discourse with respect to, if we're talking about the antecedent of a conditional claim, with respect to the elements in that antecedent, right? Every single one of them either is also a predicate class member or excluded from that group, right? The existential is not so exhaustive, right? Let's go back to just us in this room, right? If I say someone has a headache, I don't know who it is. I could be wrong if I say, it's Cameron, right? Someone or some, is much more restrictive than the universal, right? So if I say, oh, just so you know, some of the apples in that basket are not ripe. They're overripe or they're rotten or whatever, right? Which one? Right? Well, you don't know unless you further specify. It's not like saying every apple in the bunch is rotten, then it won't matter which one I pick, okay? So with existential elim, we have to make an assumption again. So we've got an existential claim, right? And what we do, let's do this, sorry. And what we do is we pull off the existential quantifier and we say, well, let's assume that the thing that's P is called N, arbitrary name N. When I derive the sentence that I want from this arbitrarily assumed name, I get to exit the subproof and say, all right, by eliminating the existential, I have established the claim that I want. some claim Q. Therefore Q. Think about existential elimination this way. Suppose that Julianne is a detective, a homicide detective. And Julianne is going to the morgue because her newest dead body is going to be autopsied. So Julianne walks in and says, "I'm here for the autopsy." Who's being autopsied? Well, it's a doe, right? So is everybody familiar with the convention for talking about unidentified bodies, right? So a body's been found. There's no identification, on the body. Unidentified body. It's a John Doe, right? So you, Julianne, say, "Oh, I'm here for the autopsy for my John Doe." Well, I've got 10 John Does, Julianne. Which one? Well, the one over there, right? So there's, let's say, a stack of bodies. Sorry, you walk into a freezer, let's say, or a cold room or wherever they store them, right? That one over there. Well, which one? So now what you do is you get creative. You might say, "Oh, well, the second one from the top," or maybe the morgue has, named, has further specified, right? John Doe 1, John Doe 2, John Doe 3. Let's go back. Remember in our text when we were talking about names and the idea that there can be one object with multiple names, but in order to make sense of what we typically talk about when we talk about a thing being what it is and not something else. In other words, when we talk about identity, we say, well, we can't have one object, or sorry, forgive me, we can have 2 or 3 or multiple objects with the same name. So what we do in logic is we make sure that we give different objects different names. And in our text, recall that Ian talks about, so let's say there's a person named Pia. So we write in short form P subscript 1, P subscript 2 if we want to differentiate them, right? So when we're talking about something, there is something, and you want to do something in the proof with that something. You want to peel off that quantifier. Well, you need to give the thing a name. And it's got to be an assumed name because you don't know if you're picking the right one. Well, let's assume that the P is named N for arbitrary name. And then we proceed along with our proof. Okay, what do we think? So far, so good?
So far, so good.
Okay. Don't be shy, Julianne. All right. Let me show you. I'm just stealing exercises from a text. Let me show you a couple of examples. I want to get something that's friendly. Okay, so suppose I have the following sentences. So all A's are B's. All B's are C's. And what I want to prove is all A's are C's. Right? So And remember, I'm going to just use a straight line rather than the pipes or the vertical lines that we use on the computer, just because I think it might be a easier visual for us. So here's how we work. We've got our argument. We look at what we're given. We're specifically, the first thing we do is we look for our conclusion. We notice that our conclusion is a universal. 99 times out of 100, when your conclusion is a universal, you set up universal intro. That's just what you do. Okay? So what does that look like? Well, you're going to work the following. Because your conclusion is a conditional claim, you're working basically conditional intro, but for the universal quantifier. So go ahead and pick a name. We'll just use N. Once you derive the consequent, you get out. You say, I've just proven that on the assumption that I have arbitrarily named N, that's an A, and I prove from it that that same N is also C, that means that any A is a C. So this will be universal intro, and we start with line 3, right? So we're going to assume. Now, here's the cool thing about our work, folks. For the most part, you are peeling off and putting on quantifiers at the beginning and the end of your proof. Pretty much everything else is a matter of doing stuff you already know, right? So you need to get lines 1 and 2 in the shape that will allow you to dismantle the conditionals, right? So line 4, and this is kind of tedious work, but this part's not hard. I'm going to instantiate my universal at line 1 to the same name, N, arbitrary name at line 3. I'm going to instantiate to the same name so I can work with the sentence. If I use different names, then I won't be able to work with the sentences in terms of my Boolean and propositional logic rules. Now you've got a couple of options here. One option is to go ahead and eliminate the conditional, right? So lines 3 and 4 get you line 5, conditional elim 3 and 4. Or you could instantiate line 2. Doesn't really matter. It's up to you.
Is line 4 a VLM, or is that a universal?
Oh, I'm sorry, Abdul. Thank you. It's a universal. My bad.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll instantiate line 1. Or sorry, I said 1. I should have said 3. And let's get the correct consequent. And then, oh, hello, we're already at the end. Once again, conditional elim, lines 5. Wait, no, this is supposed to be a B. I'm sorry, folks. 5 and 6. And then we're done 3 through 7. Thoughts? And remember, we're doing the same stuff over and over and over and over again, just with different instances, right? So different content. But the rule, we just keep applying the rules over and over again. How do you feel about that one? Pretty good?
The only way I
could do this was with the rule sheet and with a tutor. Do you know when this rule sheet is going to be available?
Yeah, sorry. You know what, Cameron, let's do this. Everybody bear with me for just a sec. Let me make sure I've got things in order here. I just needed to change the arbitrary name because Dr. Shani uses N. So here's what I'm going to do. Bear with me, Cameron. Let me make sure I haven't. Okay. I'm going to drop this in our chat folder. And I'll drop both the Word version and the PDF. And then of course I will be sure to, what's the word that I want? I'll be sure to post this on our site as well.
Are we still recording the class just for review?
Yeah. Yes. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, good. And I'll do, I know that next week is the makeup week. I'll record that one too, so that if any, on the assumption that folks want to drop in. Okay, I got that. So, and then I just dropped the Word doc in. Let me give you the what's it, the PDF. Okay, so Cameron, that might help a little bit.
It'll help a lot, I think.
Okay, good. And then the other thing is, so you mentioned, working with Lindsay. Yeah, Lindsay is phenomenal. I believe it's the case that she is not available next week. I feel like I got a message that said that. I don't know if I'm right, but I'll double check. But we should have other logic tutors available. And then of course I'm going to be around. One of the things that, and I think I've mentioned this to you folks before, but let me reiterate it. One of the things that often happens at this time in the semester is people will just come into office hours and they'll work, and I'll be doing my work and they're doing their work, and then they have a question and we chat and we sort out the issue, and then they go back to their work and I go back to my work. We can still do that. So whether it's in office hours, or if you say, oh, Mia, I want to meet during exam week, I'll say, okay, great. What time do you want to meet? We can just sit in a room, right? And as questions come up, we can chat. So I just don't want you to feel like, help's not available. All right. Are we ready for some more practice? Yes, yeah, I can't wait. All right. How about this one? So you might say, I will, I'll let you pet my cat if and only if you let me bring my dog to the party. Something like that. Okay, you can pet the cat, so I can bring the dog to the party, right? Notice what I'm doing. I'm not talking in terms of universal quantifiers, right? But when we strip those quantifiers away, we're left with a straightforward biconditional elim, right? So line 1 says everything is C if and only if it's D. Line 2 says everything is C. And and the conclusion is so everything is D. So what do? When our conclusion is a universal, we set up universal intro. This happens to be a universal with no connectives, right? So it's an atomic sentence. We are going to simply assume a name, right? And you either write the @ sign and N, or you can just write N for the assumed name. I confess that I don't know yet when we're working. I did a couple of the exercises in the text, and I think he does want you to write the @ sign for assumed name. Okay, but I'll just write N. What do we want? We want to prove that N is D. So we can get out of the subproof and say, okay, I've just proven that any old arbitrary N is D. So that means that everything is D. And notice the ordinary English that I use. I said any N, right? So that arbitrariness has the lack of specificity that we get from a variable. And this is what we want. So universal intro 3 to we're not sure yet what. Okay, so we're going to now do the straightforward, albeit tedious work of eliminating our universal at line 1 and our universal at line 2. Oops, sorry. And we're done. Why? Check out lines 4 and 5, biconditional elim 4 and 5. So that means line 7, then back out on the main spine, right? The main line of the sequence is 3 through 6, universal intro. Let's see. Sorry, I'm looking. There's something in particular I'm looking for. Well, that's a bummer. Okay. What do we think? So far, so good? Are you and are you seeing the work that we've already done in our chapters covering the Boolean and propositional logic systems, right? Folded in here. Are we ready for another? How about let's try something a little more complicated. How about this? So not everything is C. Therefore, no, wait, hold on. Is that what I want to do? Okay.
Maybe you could talk about when they don't give you the premise,
Mm-hmm.
when it's set, because I've seen that come up a couple times and I never know what to do.
Okay. Okay. So let's do this one real quick, and then let's grab one of those exercises. So here our conclusion is an existential, right? What do we know about the existential? Well, we know that it is equivalent to, or this existential form is equivalent to this negated universal. Notice also that this negated universal is the result of employing the denying of the consequent rule, right? So we know that when you have the sentence if everything is A, then everything is C. Well, it's not the case that everything is C. So it's not the case then that everything is A, right? But what if we go ahead and assume that this is the case, right? We're going to generate a contradiction, which then gets us out of the subproof. So this will be negation intro. And then from here, right, we can see this equivalence, right? So De Morgan's for quantifiers. And notice here, there's no instantiating, right? No eliminating, because we don't need to. So lines 2 and 3 by conditional elim get us line 4, and then there's a contradiction between lines 1 and 4. Right? Line 4 says everything is C. Line 1 says it's not the case that everything is C. Right? Right, so what you're wanting to do here is notice that in line 2, the quantifier scope is restricted to the antecedent, or sorry, I should have been clear. the first quantifier's scope is restricted to the antecedent, and then the second quantifier's scope is restricted to the quantifier. So unless there was some other reason for us to need to try to instantiate, there's nothing for us to do on that front. Moreover, we can't just peel off the quantifier from one side of a conditional claim, right? That would be like trying to dismantle a conditional when we need to earn the dismantling by employing either like a negation intro, as we did here, or the conditional elim rule, right? So when you peel off a quantifier, when you instantiate the universal, it's got to be across the whole line. But here we notice, like I said, we don't have the universal covering the entirety of the sentence. Cameron, you were talking about premiseless proofs. So do you have a particular exercise in mind?
I got through it on one of the other quizzes, but I just saw it was on quiz 10, and I forgot how to do it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, there's an example of it on quiz 10, number something, question 4.
Okay. So hold on just a sec, because it'll give me just a minute to get to where I need to go. Cameras. Sorry, I'm almost there. Okay. 3. Okay. So one of the things that we want to remember, and I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'm going to back up just a little bit. Hold on while I find what I want. Here we go. All right, so let's back up just a smidge. Suppose I have let's take the following sentence. A is identical to B, and A is A, and it's not the case that B is A. Is this sentence true? So if A is one and the same thing as B, or A is B, A and B are the same. If A and B are the same, is it possible for A to be A? Or I can change the letters if it helps. Make it less times I'm saying A. Is it possible for A to be P, but B to not be P? Does that make sense? What do you think? Let me try and give you a more meaty example. Okay, so Walter is Gator. It's a nickname. Walter is a pit bull, but Gator is not a pit bull. Is this sentence ever true? What do you think? I guess Walter's downstairs. Right? If Walter is one and the same as Gator, right? So Walter is identical with Gator. Oops, sorry. Didn't mean to put a capital. Right? Walter is a pit bull. It's not the case that Gator is a pit bull. Can these sentences be simultaneously true? What do you think?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. It's impossible. So this sentence is necessarily false, right? No. It is false. Okay, so how do we make it? If it's necessarily false, it can never be true. How do we make it true? Well, this is easy. Let's just put a negation out front. And I'm going to go back to our original sentence, A is identical to B. Fair enough? So now, and this is the question you're asking, and I know you're sorry, go ahead.
Oh, nothing. I had to make it. Nothing, never mind.
Okay. All right, so Let's take this bad boy. Bring it over here. So we have no premise, right? Okay, we need to prove the sentence. It's not the case that A is identical to B. Come on, Mia. And A is P and it's not the case that B is P. So the easiest way typically to prove that a sentence is necessarily true is to go ahead and assume that it's not the case. Right, so we're going to do a negation intro here. So let's go ahead and assume that A is identical to B and A is P and B is not P. Let's go ahead and assume that sentence is true. We're going to generate a contradiction.
So you do a reductio.
Yeah, you got it.
I forgot which one was reductio. That was part of the problem.
Negation intro, yeah. So reductio ad absurdum, right? So this will be contradiction intro at that line. So one, and then we just go ahead and dismantle, right? We dismantle. We can go ahead and do identity elim if we want now, or we can dismantle the third conjunct, doesn't matter. What do we think? So line 2 is, oh guys, I apologize. I'm using different notation. I'm sorry. Why don't you yell at me? Was anybody wondering about that?
I like the regular notation better than the phone-friendly one.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I understand why he does it.
I've been trying to use the regular one as much as possible.
Yeah, if you can go back and forth easily, go for it. I'm just terrible at drawing ampersands, so.
Yeah, but you have to copy and paste it every time you put it into the computer is the only.
Oh. Yeah. You could do shortcuts. Yeah, but anyway, so gosh, thanks a lot. I have to correct my own mistakes. What's wrong with you people? You're supposed to correct my mistakes. Okay, so we have conjunction elim at line 2 from line 1. Oh, right, sorry, this is assume. Then another conjunction elim from line 1. Then line 4 is identity elim from 2 and 3. Line 5, another conjunction elim from line 1. And then contradiction intro, 4 and 5. And then negation intro, 1 through 6. Okay, so first, before we move on, does that, going back a little bit, does that help? Going back to just what we remember from our Boole days. And this is a combination of Boole and first order logic because we've got the identity symbol, but what do we think? Is that pretty good? And if so, now let's think about how we can work within the doing this, how we can do the same things, right? We can generate contradictions. We can make an assumption without there having been a premise that is providing us maybe some more context than we have, that would provide more context, right, if we had it. So let's think about this guy. Suppose that we have the following sentence. We want existential P or not P, right? So this sentence is a first order necessity, right? So the question is, how do we derive the sentence, right? So the sentence says something's either, it either is or it isn't. That's a sort of colloquial way of talking about what the sentence asserts, right? So, we've got a couple ways we can go. One way we could go is to, assume it's false. So we could assume the sentence is false. Generate a contradiction and exit the subproof via negation intro, right? So what that would look like is this. We assume it's not the case that something either is or is not, right? This is how it would look. Right? And then you just have the intervening steps to fill in. But you might think, well, okay, on the assumption that I'm allowed, let's say, De Morgan's exchange, the quantifier, change of quantifier, the De Morganization of the quantifier, if I'm allowed that, then sure, I could just push the thing through, right? So I'd end up with this. And then I can eliminate the universal, right? I've still got to end up with, a contradiction at some point. So there's still a bit of work to be done. But I don't recall offhand if there's a prohibition against using a non-intro or elim rule within the proof. Right, so sometimes you're told, you can use the De Morganization of a quantifier, and then other times you might be told don't do that. Does that make sense? So let's see. Oh, there it is. Okay. Right, so that's potentially one way to go. What's another way to go? Well, you could still set up a negation intro, but rather than assuming that the conclusion is false, you could set up just a straight Boolean sentence, right, with a name. Because remember, when you have a necessarily true sentence, you can get at that truth from any number of directions. Right? So what if instead you said, okay, well, what if I assume I'm still going to have to make some further assumptions, right? Because what this sentence is denying, what this assumptive step is denying, is that the sentence P or not P is true. But the sentence P or not P is necessarily true. Right? So you'd end up, what you'd want to be able to do is you'll want to generate, you'll need more subproofs, but you'll want to generate a situation in which you've got this sentence, right, which contradicts, these two are contradictory. And you might need, you probably need multiple iterations of that. Does this make sense as a potential way forward? Right, so when you're thinking of the premiseless proofs, your first thought should be an indirect proof, aka reductio ad absurdum, aka negation intro, right? But you want to be flexible, because depending on what the sentence is, you might actually need to start a subproof with a different plan in mind. Let's do this. We can come back to this one, Cameron, if you want. But let's do a couple where we're dealing with the existential rules. I just want to make sure that you guys have a few examples of each to help you get going. And then we can always come back to this. In addition, we can come back to, like, for example, on Tuesday, we can come back to any of the stuff that's outstanding in terms of questions, problems, confusions, or stuff that we didn't get to spend a lot of time on. What do you think? How about
There was one I kind of wanted to work on, if possible.
Yeah, let's do it. What do you think?
There was this one on, I think it's on chapter 32.
Okay.
In the extra practice. It was the second one.
Okay. Just did it again. We'll do it this way. Okay, we'll do it that way. Okay. So, as a note on strategy, we know that when our conclusion is a universal, we're going to set up universal intro. Okay? What would be nice to see or be comfortable with is also the fact that if we push the negation through the existential thereby swapping the existential out for the universal. And then if we further demorganize the sentence, this time in terms of truth functionality, we'll end up with the conclusion. So let me show you really quickly what I mean. So here's the original sentence. This sentence is logically equivalent to this sentence. This sentence is logically equivalent to this sentence. Did I go? Oh, yeah, sorry. I was looking at something else. And then this sentence is equivalent to the one I'm writing now. Okay. So, you know, you can get from one to the other just by pushing negations around. Okay? Now, remember, we're going to assume the antecedent, assume a name for it. Sorry, that's crooked. Oh my gosh, that's still rotten, but I'm going to leave it as it is. We want the consequent, right? So that we can say, look, I've just proven that from this arbitrarily named A, I've derived this arbitrarily named not B. So no A is B, or every A is not B, or all A's are not B's. So this is our universal variety, the conditional variety, 2 through whatever we're going to end up with. Okay. Now, working backwards still, right? We might say, okay, how am I going to get not Bn? Well, remember back in our Boole days, assume the sentence you want is not the case, generate a contradiction, introduce the negation. Now we can conjoin A and B. We can generalize. And now we've got our contradiction. What do you think? Right, so assume, conjoin, generalize, introduce the existential, introduce the contradiction, we've already said that we're working negation intro, so that'll be 3 through 6. And then we already said we were setting up universal intro, so that's 2 through 7. What do you think? Do you love it? I know. You're speechless with joy. does it make sense that, in this example, you're doing stuff you already know how to do, right? Okay, ready. So let's say everything is A or B. Every A is C. There is something that is not, what was that? Yeah, that's not C. And our goal is there is something that is B. Okay, so let's revisit our strategies. When your conclusion is a universal, set up universal intro. Okay. The assumed name is always going to be one that's not already in use. We can talk more about why that's the case, but it is the case. Same also with the existential. So yeah, you could eliminate the universal at 1, you could eliminate the universal at 2, but then if you were to start your existential elim subproof, you'd have to have a whole new name. And then you wouldn't be able to work with the operators. So go ahead and set up existential elimination as your beginning point, where the goal is the conclusion, so that you can exit the subproof and say, from the assumption that arbitrarily named not C. Sorry, I have the wrong notation here. Forgive me. Right? From this assumption, I generated the conclusion. So, by the elimination of the existential from lines 3 and then 4 to whatever our endpoint is, right? We've set up our proof, right? So when you're gonna set up existential elim, make sure that that's you're inaugurating or structuring subproof, that there aren't any names already in use. Now you're in the business of dismantling. Dismantling what? Your universals. There's no restriction on that. Now, you've got a disjunction. You're going to need to eliminate it. You can either do it now or you can go ahead and peel off your universal from line 2 first. Doesn't matter. Okay. Remember what you want. You want to get B on its own, so that you can generalize to the existential, right? So let's set up our further. Oh, sorry. I probably need more room here. Hold on just a sec. Otherwise, it's going to start looking uglier than it already does look. So we said we wanted BN, so then we can generalize, right? Existential intro. So let's go ahead and set up our subproof. We're going to assume A, N, and what do we want? We want B, N. And then we'll assume B, N, and we'll reiterate it. So here, oh gosh, once again, I've run out of room. Folks, I'm sorry. Let me erase and make us much more room. Hold on. By the way, though, I mean, I guess this isn't so bad because this will give you a chance to, you've seen what we've just done. Now you can think about it. Oops, don't need quite that much. Okay, so 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15. We said we were setting up existential elim 3, 4 through 14. Yeah? Line 14 is the introduction of the existential from 13. 13 is the result of the disjunction elim, right? Disjunction elim, 5, 7 to 10, 11 to 12. 12 is the reiteration of 11. 11 is an assumption. 10 is the elimination of the contradiction at 9. 9 is the introduction of the contradiction from 4 and 8. 8 is the result of conditional elim from 6 and 7. 7 is an assumption. 4 is also an assumption. And we already justified and cited lines 5 and 6. All right, let's pause. Thoughts. How is everybody doing? What do you think?
Are you going to add these proofs, like this proof, to the sheets that are available to download?
Well, you know what I did, Cameron, because I've been full of dumb acts. I'll save this. You know what I did with the other whiteboards is, you know how I kept changing the share screen? They don't save automatically, and I forgot to set Zoom to save them automatically. So short story is I effed up. So I only have a couple, these last couple that I've saved. But yes, I'd be happy to add them. You know, worst case scenario is I'll just go, you know what I could do is just go into the video and take a screenshot, and I can add them from a screenshot.
Oh yeah, go to video.
Yeah. But you don't need, nobody wants to sit through 2+ hours to find this. I'll do it, I promise. But how are you guys doing? I mean, do you feel at least confident that a lot of this stuff you've done, you've worked on? In addition, I know it's not trying to diminish the difficulty level, but the good news is, given we don't have a proof program right now, so the way that these proofs are set up is such that you've got the structure, right? You're given, okay, there's a subproof, there's a nested subproof, right? So you have a sense of, in very general terms, yet still a sense of the structure, right? Whereas what you and I are doing together with the examples we've just looked at, we're actually producing these on our own, and that's harder to do. So thoughts, what do you think? I owe you practice. I promise I'm going to get that to you. And as Cameron's pointed out, I'll get you the the exercises that we worked on the whiteboard. But I think your focus should be on, proof practice and basic translation practice. Yes, it's true that in the quiz, as Cameron pointed out, there's that anomaly, the BDC move, right? I'll just throw that point back in there. But the quizzes are harder than the exams. But the quizzes you can go at multiple times. You can go into the chapters and the sections to look stuff up. But so my advice is, practice as much as you can. And then if you want to meet on Tuesday, kind of bring with you what you want to talk about. And we can work on that stuff. And then I'll also, remind you of of what you did in the quizzes, where that stuff is. And I'll remind you of what you can expect to see on the exam. Because you're not going to see anything on the exam that you didn't see in a quiz, but there's stuff in the quiz that you're not going to see on the exam. The exam is more narrowly focused. Thoughts? Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm flushing really, really bad. Ah. I was looking like a Cabbage Patch Kid before. They still have Cabbage Patch Kids when you guys were kids? Or was that just my generation?
I had one.
Did you have one? So you know what I'm talking about, right? So like I was waking up and my face and my fingers, I looked like a freaking Cabbage Patch Kid. Now I'm just down to red, but Julianne, don't ask me why I'm only remembering now, but we were gonna meet on a Friday and I think I screwed up.
Oh yeah, it was okay because I ended up having to go to work later on that day, so it actually worked out fine.
Are you sure? Because
I'll probably meet you again this week.
okay. Well, don't feel like you've got to be restricted to office hours. If you can't make an office hour, but you want to meet, let me know. And like I said earlier, if you guys were to say, hey, we want to meet at thus and such a time, and I'm just going to be working on stuff. And when you have questions, here I am and I'm working on my stuff. It's just like I would normally do in regular office hours, right? Don't feel like if you're going to drop in or if you make a time for us to meet that you've got to be talking all the time or that you expect me to talk all the time. You can just be working on things and then just know I'm here if a question arises. That's okay. Totally fine.
Sounds good.
All right, folks.
Professor, can I stay after class to ask a couple of questions?
Of course, Abdul. Yeah. So let me know if you need anything. Otherwise, I will either see you in office hours, outside of office hours, maybe on Tuesday, and look out for the stuff I owe you. I should get it to you no later than tomorrow, end of day, okay? Because I'm trying to get caught up on things, and I'm slowly getting there. So let me go ahead and end this.